Logan Price had never been the kind of guy who stood out in a crowd. At 29, he lived in a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon, where he worked the early shift at a local coffee shop called Bean Scene Cafe. His days were predictable. Wake up at 5 a.m., bike to work through misty gray streets, brew lattes and pour black coffee for the neighborhood regulars, and then return to his one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat by mid-afternoon. Logan's life was simple, some might even say mundane, but he liked it that way. After losing both his parents in a car accident when he was 19, Logan had learned not to expect too much from the world. He kept to himself, read used paperbacks, watched old movies on VHS tapes he picked up from thrift stores, and saved every extra dollar he earned. He had no siblings, no girlfriend, and only a couple of friends he talked to occasionally. Despite that, Logan wasn't bitter. He saw himself as a realist. No one owes you anything, he often reminded himself. So, don't expect it. But under that hardened realism was a quietly aching heart. Logan longed for something more. He just didn't know what that more was. He'd occasionally glance at the glossy travel magazines customers left behind in the cafe, wondering what it might feel like to stand on a mountaintop in Switzerland or float on a gondola in Venice. Still, those were fantasies, not plans. Dreams, he figured, were for people with trust funds. It was a Saturday afternoon in early spring when Logan first noticed the old man. He was hunched over a cane, struggling to lift a brown paper bag filled with groceries from the checkout counter at the corner store. Most people passed by without a glance. Portland was polite, but not necessarily helpful. Logan, standing behind him in line with nothing but a bottle of iced tea, stepped forward instinctively. "Hey, sir, let me help you with that," he offered, already reaching for the bag. The old man looked up, his eyes watery but sharp behind thick glasses. "That's kind of you," he rasped. "People don't usually offer." "It's no big deal," Logan said, balancing the bag in one arm and gently guiding the man toward the exit. "Where do you live?" "Just down the block, third house on the left." The walk was slow, the bag heavier than Logan expected, but the conversation lightened the weight. The old man introduced himself as Mr. Harold Whitaker, a retired history professor who had lived in the neighborhood for over 40 years. "I taught at Lewis and Clark College," Harold said proudly, though his voice trembled. "I've outlived most of my students. Outlived my wife, too." "I'm sorry," Logan said quietly. "No need to be. I've had a good run. But I suppose time gets greedy in the end." When they reached Harold's modest house, paint peeling, wind chimes gently singing from the porch, Logan set the bag down inside the doorway. "Thank you again," Harold said. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago." Logan smiled awkwardly. "Well, I hope that's a good thing." "It is," Harold nodded. Then, before Logan turned to leave, he added, "Why don't you come by next Saturday? I've got old jazz records and no one to listen to them with." Logan hesitated. Normally, he would have politely declined and walked away. But something in Harold's voice, some quiet loneliness that mirrored his own, made him say, "Sure, why not?" That small encounter would have seemed insignificant to anyone watching, but it was the moment everything began to shift. In the days that followed, Logan couldn't stop thinking about Harold. There was something oddly familiar about the man, something comforting. And when Saturday rolled around, Logan found himself knocking on Harold's door with a six-pack of root beer in hand. They spent the afternoon on Harold's worn-out couch, listening to crackling vinyl records of Miles Davis and Billie Holiday. Harold told stories of his youth, how he once hitchhiked across the Midwest, how he met his wife during the civil rights marches, how he nearly got fired for defending a controversial book in his classroom. Logan listened, fascinated. For the first time in years, he felt connected to someone. "I used to think," Harold said, staring at the spinning record, "that life was a series of carefully planned chapters. Turns out, it's just a bunch of surprises. Some good, some not. The trick is showing up for all of them." By the time Logan left that evening, the bond between the two had already deepened. A week later, Logan was back, this time bringing Harold some homemade chili and helping him organize old books in the attic. He found joy in the simplicity of their growing friendship. There were no expectations, no pressure, just shared moments. But something strange happened during one of those visits. Logan noticed a man in a black suit parked across the street in a luxury car, watching the house. The man didn't get out, didn't speak, just sat there. Logan asked Harold about it. Oh, him? Harold shrugged. Just a lawyer. Don't worry about it. But Logan did worry. Something felt off. Why would a lawyer be watching an old professor's house? Was Harold in trouble? Logan brushed it off, but that was the first clue. The first flicker of something deeper. Something unseen. Something unbelievable. 2 weeks had passed since Logan had first helped Harold Whitaker home with his groceries, and already their weekend hangouts had become a ritual. Logan would show up every Saturday around noon, sometimes bringing soup, sometimes a new thrift store record, and Harold would be waiting at the door in his sweater vest and slippers, beaming like he had been expecting a long-lost friend. But Logan couldn't shake the feeling about the man in the black suit. Every now and then, the sleek silver Lincoln Continental would reappear across the street, always parked at a distance, the driver always hidden behind dark, tinted windows. No one ever got out. No notes were left. But Logan knew he was being watched, they both were. One Saturday afternoon, as rain traced crooked lines down the windows, Logan finally asked again. Harold, I've seen that car a few more times. The guy never gets out. Are you sure it's just a lawyer? Harold was silent for a long time. He leaned back in his recliner, his gnarled fingers resting on a mug of lukewarm tea, eyes focused on a jazz record spinning slowly in the corner. You're a good kid, Logan, he said finally. You got a good heart. That's why I like you. Thanks, Logan replied cautiously. But you didn't answer my question. Harold sighed. Let's just say the man in that car is keeping track of a promise I made. One that's about to come due. A promise? Harold smiled faintly. You'll understand in time. The next week, Harold handed Logan a yellowing envelope. The paper was brittle and the handwriting elegant, like something from another century. What's this? Logan asked. Harold's voice dropped. Instructions. For after I'm gone. Logan blinked. Come on, Harold. Don't talk like that. You're not going anywhere. I'm old, kid. I've had more years than I deserved. It's not about going somewhere, it's about finishing something. That envelope? Don't open it yet. Just keep it safe. Logan hesitated. You're scaring me. You shouldn't be scared. Just aware. Nothing in life happens by accident, Logan. And you didn't help me out of the kindness of your heart, by coincidence. That was the beginning of a chain reaction. The gears are already turning. Logan didn't know what to say. He slipped the envelope into his backpack and changed the subject. But that night, he stared at it for hours, wondering what secrets it might hold. A few days later, Logan's world shifted again. He got home from work to find a message on his voicemail from Charles Denning, a partner at Denning and Wolf Attorneys at Law, a high-end estate law firm in downtown Portland. Mr. Price, I'm calling in regard to Mr. Harold Whitaker. He's listed you as a personal contact and requested we reach out to you if his condition changed. Please return the call as soon as possible. Logan's heart dropped. He called back immediately, voice shaky. Is Harold okay? There was a pause. I'm sorry to inform you, Mr. Whitaker passed away this morning, peacefully in his sleep. The words hit like a freight train. Gone? Just like that? He had just seen Harold days ago. He seemed tired, sure, but still sharp, still full of stories. I don't understand, Logan stammered. He never mentioned he was sick. Mr. Whitaker was a private man. He made specific preparations in case of his death. He asked that you be present for the reading of his will. Can you come to our office tomorrow at 3 p.m.? Logan agreed, but his mind was spinning. What could Harold possibly have left for him? He wasn't family. He wasn't even a lifelong friend. He was just a barista who helped carry some groceries. Right? The law office was everything Logan wasn't used to. Glass walls, mahogany furniture, quiet wealth dripping from every inch. He sat awkwardly in the waiting room, dressed in faded jeans and a hoodie, feeling like he'd wandered into the wrong universe. When he was called in, a tall, clean-shaven man in a sharp navy suit greeted him. Mr. Price, I'm Charles Denning. Please have a seat. They sat in a private conference room where a large leather folder sat waiting. Mr. Whitaker had no surviving family, Denning began. No children. No siblings. But he was very specific in his final wishes. You were the only individual named in his will. Logan blinked. Wait, what? You mean no one else? That's correct. Charles opened the folder and began to read. I, Harold Whitaker, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, including assets, property, and all accompanying financial holdings, to Mr. Logan Arthur Price. Logan's jaw dropped. Charles continued, this includes my home at 218 Ashwood Lane, my bank accounts totaling $3.4 million, and all intellectual property rights associated with my unpublished manuscripts and historical writings. Logan was speechless. I mean, is this even real? Charles gave a small, amused smile. It's real. Mr. Whitaker had a lengthy trust set up decades ago. It grew significantly over the years. He was also a surprisingly successful academic publisher under a pseudonym. The royalties alone last year were in the six figures. Logan gripped the edge of the table. I was just his friend. I didn't do anything. Charles looked at him directly. You showed up, Mr. Price, when no one else did. And then he slid a small, sealed letter across the table. Mr. Whitaker asked that you read this, privately, before making any decisions about the estate. Logan stared at the envelope, heart pounding. His name was written in neat cursive, the same handwriting as the yellowing envelope Harold had given him weeks ago. This one simply said, the truth about who you really are. Logan sat alone in his apartment that night, both envelopes spread before him like artifacts from another life. He hadn't turned on the lights. Only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant city sounds outside filled the space. He picked up the first envelope Harold had given him, worn, yellow, its seal broken days ago in a moment of weakness. Inside had been a list of instructions: meet with the lawyer, accept the inheritance, and wait for a final message. Harold had promised the truth would come once Logan was ready. Now that moment had arrived. Logan picked up the second envelope, the one that Charles Denning had slid across the table. The truth about who you really are, it read. Hands trembling, he broke the seal. Inside was a letter in Harold's distinct handwriting, followed by several photocopied documents, some of them decades old, others more recent. Birth records, adoption certificates, a DNA test. The letter began. Logan, if you're reading this, then my time has passed, and your journey is truly beginning. You're likely confused, even overwhelmed. But you deserve to know the truth. I knew your mother. Her name was Adrienne Monroe. A brilliant woman. Sharp as a whip, heart like gold. We worked together in the early 90s when I taught political theory at the University of Chicago. What she never told you because she was too proud to ask for help is that you were mine. Yes, Logan. I'm your father. Logan stopped breathing. He read that line over and over again. I'm your father. It couldn't be real. There was no way. His mother had always said his dad was a mistake from the past, a man she'd never name. Just a ghost who left before Logan ever opened his eyes to the world. But the documents told a different story. There it was, Logan Arthur Monroe, born July 16, 1999, Chicago Memorial Hospital. Mother, Adrienne Monroe. Father, Harold Whitaker. Paternity confirmed via DNA in a test dated only 3 years ago, taken while Logan was unknowingly a volunteer for a local genealogy project. Harold must have found a sample, maybe from a discarded coffee cup. I had to be sure, Harold wrote. I couldn't approach you until I knew with certainty. Tears streamed down Logan's face. The man he had thought was just an old stranger had been watching over him his entire life, from a distance. And when he finally stepped in, he did it not as a father trying to reclaim time, but as a man simply hoping to leave his son better off than he'd been left himself. But there was more. The next page in the envelope was a letter from the Department of Justice. Marked confidential, it bore the seal of the U.S. government. Logan's hands trembled as he read it. It confirmed that Harold Whitaker had been a deep-cover civil rights informant for over 20 years. During the 1970s and 80s, the document read, Harold Whitaker assisted the FBI in exposing internal corruption in state police departments and covert operations targeting African-American activists. His identity was sealed for his protection after several assassination attempts. His academic career provided the perfect cover. Logan stared at the page. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was legacy. Harold had been hiding in plain sight. A man with more secrets than any father should have, and yet, everything he did was calculated, protective, intentional. The final page was handwritten again. I never stepped forward because I thought you'd be safer not knowing. But when I saw you, when you helped me without asking for anything, I knew it was time. You didn't see an old man. You saw a human being. And in doing that, you saw your own heart. You're more like me than you know, Logan. Not just in blood, but in spirit. You fight for what's right. You care when others walk away. That is the true inheritance. The money, the house, those are tools. The real gift is who you already are. Logan folded the letter gently, placing it back inside the envelope like a sacred relic. He sat in silence for a long time until finally, a memory flashed in his mind, one that had made no sense at the time. A week before Harold died, they'd sat on the porch drinking mint tea. Harold had turned to him and said, You know, you have Adrienne's eyes. Same fire, same sorrow. Logan had thought he was talking about some long-lost student. Now he knew. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he researched every file in the manila envelope. Names Harold had scribbled in the margins. Old court cases, newspaper clippings, academic journals where Harold had published under a pen name. By sunrise, Logan understood the full picture. Harold Whitaker hadn't just left him a fortune. He had left him a mission. The world still carried the scars of the battles Harold had fought. Systemic racism, corruption, exploitation of the poor, none of it had disappeared. It had just changed its mask. And now Harold was gone. But Logan remained. And the letter ended with one final line. There is a hidden file in the study at Ashwood Lane. Behind the bookcase. When you're ready, go there. It's time to decide what kind of man you'll be. The next day, Logan stepped into the house at Ashwood Lane not as a visitor, but as its owner. He walked straight to the study, the warm, wood-paneled room where Harold had told him stories over coffee. He scanned the shelves, looking for anything out of place. There. A copy of Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison was sticking out slightly farther than the rest. Logan pulled it. The shelf clicked. A panel slid open. Behind it was a lockbox, small and steel. Logan entered Harold's birthday. August 3rd, 1942. The lock snapped open. Inside were flash drives, documents marked top secret, and a handwritten journal. As Logan flipped through the pages, he realized what he was holding. Evidence. Records of crimes long buried. Files on officers, judges, and lawmakers whose careers had been built on the suffering of others. Harold hadn't just exposed injustice in the past. He had kept going. He had kept receipts. And now all of it, every name, every truth, belonged to Logan. Logan stood in the heart of Ashwood Lane study. The steel lockbox opened before him like a vault of fire. His hands trembled slightly as he held Harold's journal. Each page was laced with truth and danger. These weren't just notes from an old man. These were weapons. He turned the pages slowly, his breath catching as he read names he'd only ever seen on campaign signs and courtroom doors. Judge Malcolm Reed, Congresswoman Janet Hill, Detective Carl Bowman. Powerful names. Protected names. People who had built legacies on injustice, silenced whistleblowers, and buried investigations. Harold had been watching them for decades. And now Logan had the proof to bring their empires crumbling down. But exposing the truth wasn't as simple as pressing upload. These people had resources. Media allies. Political machines. They would come for him if he made a move. They'd crush him if they could. But Logan didn't flinch. Because now he finally knew who he was. That evening, Logan visited someone who had once been like a second mother to him, Mrs. Thompson, an old librarian from the South Side who ran a community center and legal clinic in her spare time. When he handed her the first stack of files, her eyes widened. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "This is... Logan, do you know what you're holding?" He nodded. "I do. I need your help. I want to do it right." Mrs. Thompson placed a hand over her mouth, holding back tears. "Your daddy used to talk about you. I never believed it until now. Said you'd change everything one day. Looks like he was right." Logan and Mrs. Thompson worked in secret for weeks. The data was too explosive to share outright. So they built a network: activists, lawyers, tech experts, old students of Harold's who still believed in justice. A quiet army, bound by truth. Every document was verified. Every testimony cross-referenced. They compiled it into a digital dossier called the Whitaker Files. Meanwhile, Logan filed a motion to reopen a 1998 civil rights case, Harold Whitaker versus Chicago Police Department, a lawsuit that had been dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Now, the evidence was overwhelming. The media got wind of it when Logan gave his first anonymous leak to a black journalist from the Washington Informer. Within 48 hours, the story had spread like wildfire. At first, the establishment tried to spin it. They called it unverified. They questioned Harold's credibility. They tried to dig into Logan's past, his student loans, a parking ticket from 2017, even his breakup with a girl from college. But it didn't work. Because for every lie they told, Logan released another truth. Every attack they made only drew more attention to the real villains in power. People began to rally around the story, not just because of what Harold had exposed, but because of who Logan had become. A black man, once forgotten, now holding the receipts of America's broken promises. Then came the moment everything changed. Judge Malcolm Reed, the same man who had once dismissed Harold's original case, was found to have suppressed evidence in 3 separate civil rights trials. Logan submitted the original memos, signed in Reed's own handwriting, where he instructed court clerks to lose certain exhibits. The morning the news broke, Logan walked straight into the federal courthouse. The security guards looked up. "You got an appointment?" one asked. Logan didn't blink. "No," he said. "I've got a legacy." He stepped into the chambers like a storm. In front of the judge, cameras rolling, microphones pointed at him. Logan laid down the final file. "This isn't about revenge," he said, voice steady. "It's about restoration. The truth was buried. But now, it's been unearthed." He turned to face the court. "I am Logan Monroe Whitaker, son of Harold Whitaker. And today, I reclaim his voice." Gasps filled the room. Even Judge Reed froze. And for the first time in decades, the gavel trembled in the judge's own hand. By nightfall, Logan's name was trending nationwide. Not because he was flashy. Not because he had chased the spotlight, but because he stood in the fire and didn't burn. Whistleblower's son exposes political corruption across generations. Hidden files spark calls for mass resignations. Harold Whitaker's legacy lives on. The most powerful people in the city, the very ones who once laughed at Harold, were now issuing statements of resignation, scrambling to explain their pasts and begging for leniency. But the real moment of power came not from the headlines. It came when Logan returned to Ashwood Lane, stepped onto the back porch, and sat in the very chair where Harold had once spoken those mysterious words. "You have Adrienne's eyes." Now Logan understood. His mother had carried the pain of abandonment, but she had also carried the fire of resilience. And Harold, though absent, had never stopped trying to protect them both. He closed his eyes. "I see you now," Logan whispered into the night. "Both of you." And in that still silence, a peace unlike any he had ever known settled over him. Not because the fight was over, but because he finally knew who he was fighting for. 2 months later, Ashwood Lane looked different. Not physically. It still had its towering elms, the slow hum of bees in the garden, and the soft creak of the back porch swing. But it felt different. It no longer carried the weight of silence. It was no longer a relic of the past. It was the birthplace of something new. Logan stood in the living room, holding a letter that had arrived by courier that morning. On the letterhead were the gold-embossed words, Office of the Attorney General, United States Department of Justice. They were launching formal investigations based on the Whitaker files. Several cases were being reopened, and three of the most powerful names in Chicago's judicial and political arenas had already stepped down. Logan looked around the room, its air no longer haunted. The ghost of Harold Whitaker wasn't here anymore. He had done what he came to do. Now it was Logan's turn to live. The media offered book deals, TV appearances. Even a Netflix documentary producer had reached out. But Logan turned most of it down. He didn't want the attention. Instead, he used part of his inheritance to launch the Whitaker Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting whistleblowers, young legal activists, and community justice reform. He hired people who had once felt invisible, paralegals from overlooked neighborhoods, exonerated men and women who had survived wrongful imprisonment, and law students who refused to sell their souls for corporate jobs. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was sacred. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Logan sat at the kitchen table with Mrs. Thompson and a few volunteers. A teenage boy named Jalen, barely 16, was presenting his case. His brother had been arrested on false charges, and they had no money for a lawyer. Logan listened carefully, taking notes, nodding slowly. When Jalen finished, Logan stood, walked over, and handed him a file. "This is everything you need," he said. "And if it's not, I'll get it." The boy's eyes widened. "Why would you help us?" Logan smiled. "Because someone helped me once. A long time ago. And he didn't have to." Jalen tilted his head. "What was his name?" Logan looked out the window, raindrops tracing the glass like memory. "Harold Whitaker," he said softly. "He was my father." Weeks passed. Spring turned to early summer. Logan found himself driving through Southside Chicago, not because he had to, but because he wanted to remember. He visited old friends from the neighborhood, teachers, mentors, even the corner store owner who had once let him slide on candy when he was a kid. They didn't ask for much, just his presence. And that he gave freely. In those moments, Logan understood something deeper. Harold hadn't left him something unbelievable in his will because of guilt. He had left him that legacy because he believed Logan could carry it, could expand it. Not a burden, a baton. One afternoon, Logan received a package with no return address. Inside was a faded photograph. Harold, young and smiling, holding baby Logan in his arms beside Adrian, who wore a radiant smile and an afro full of sun. Tucked behind the photo was a note in neat, old-fashioned cursive. "You weren't just my son. You were always my hope." I didn't know how to say it then. I pray I've said it now. Love always, Harold. Logan clutched the note to his chest and let the tears come, not of grief, but of release. He had mourned the father he never knew. Now, he could celebrate the one he had rediscovered. At the next community event hosted by the Whitaker Foundation, Logan stood in front of a crowd of over 200 people, teachers, students, activists, and residents. Some came with stories, others with wounds, but all came with hope. Logan didn't give a rehearsed speech. He didn't read from paper. He just spoke from the heart. "I was once a kid who felt invisible, a kid who thought good people always finish last. But someone carried a flame long enough to pass it to me, and I intend to pass it again. To all of you." Applause filled the hall. Some stood. Some wept. In the back, Mrs. Thompson watched with quiet pride. Harold's legacy wasn't carved in stone. It was carried in action. One night, Logan walked through Ashwood Lane one last time. He passed Harold's old study, now transformed into a reading and resource room for youth. In the center sat Harold's desk, polished and untouched. On it rested two items, the sealed will and the photograph Logan had received. He turned off the light and stepped outside under a blanket of stars. The wind rustled through the trees. It wasn't cold, it was alive. Like a whisper saying, "You did good, son." Logan smiled, then turned to walk down the long gravel path, no longer carrying his past like a weight, but wearing it like a crown. He wasn't just Harold's heir. He was the bridge between generations, the keeper of justice, the light in the dark. And as he disappeared into the horizon, one thing was certain. The man who once helped an old stranger carry his groceries had ended up carrying the legacy of a lifetime.